Hey friends, tonight we're slipping into the damp alleys and crooked kitchens of the medieval world, straight into a place no sane stomach would dare to tread, the village bakery. Here, every loaf is a gamble, every bite is a mystery, and the only sure thing is the nagging question, will this kill me or merely haunt me until morning? Picture it, a warped wooden table groaning under the weight of lumpy bread. The air thick with flour, sweat, and something living. The baker, red-faced and wild-haired, wipes her brow, cracks open a loaf, and oh, good, a green fuzzball stares back. Welcome to breakfast. You're hungry. You're here. And unless your digestive tract is made of iron and poor decisions, you might not make it through this meal. But before we go further, if this cozy little descent into culinary chaos makes you feel just a bit less alone tonight, maybe like the video, subscribe, or drop a comment telling us where you're listening from. Is it 2 a.m. and you're curled beneath a blanket, eyes wide? Or are you stuck on a rainy commute, trying not to gag at the thought of wormy bread? Let us know. Let's remind each other, this weird world is slightly less awful when we face it together. Dim the lights. Loosen your shoulders. And let's begin tonight's strange, soggy, fungal journey into medieval bread. You stand at the door of a bakehouse, the wood swollen, damp, moaning as it opens. Inside, a heat that clings to your skin and a snow that makes you question all your choices. It's flour, yes, but also old sweat, mildew, and something that feels sentient. Bread is survival here. Or at least, that's the comforting lie people mutter while gnawing on something dense enough to be used as a weapon. Every day, women and boys huddle near crumbling ovens, shoving in dough and praying for something edible to come out. But prayer has its limits when your flour might be half mold, peppered with bugs, or sprinkled with mystery crunch. Scan the shelves, rows of sad, sunken loaves. Their origin story? Grain harvested from rain-soaked fields, possibly nibbled by every rodent in Europe. By the time it reaches the mill, it's more compost than crop. The miller does his best to sift out the rat droppings. He really does. But time is short, hands are few, and customers are cranky. The grinding stones are chipped. The flour is fortified with flakes of rock, beetle bits, and seeds no one can name. This isn't artisanal. It's accidental. A mother calls her children to breakfast, slicing into a loaf with a knife that's seen better centuries. The crust splits. Something skitters. She shrugs, tears off a chunk, and offers it to you. And because you're hungry and not quite ready to die, you take it. The texture? Like chewing gravel in vinegar. The flavor? Sharp, sour, and suspicious. But flavor stopped mattering 5 famines ago. If it doesn't move, bite it. If it moves ... well, bite faster. Some historians argue that peasants lost all taste distinction by the 3rd bite. We don't blame them. In this world, texture is torture. And mold is just another seasoning. You think about the first baker to try wild fermentation. A genius or a lunatic, hard to say. Wild yeast drifts through the air, here on fingers, walls, and maybe the neighbor's goat. Sometimes it works. Sometimes your dough slumps into a swampy mush. Still, nothing gets tossed. Mold gets trimmed. Green spots get scraped. And people pretend heat kills everything. Spoiler, it doesn't. Sometimes the rock runs deep blue-green, veins of death pulsing through the soft crumb. There are stories of children who swell, burn with fever, and start seeing angels or demons after a long winter of nothing but cursed rye. Entire villages fall to madness. Later, scholars call it ergot. Back then, they just blamed the baker or the devil. And if it's not fungus, it's bugs. Flour beetles, weevils, larvae. 1, 2, 3 per slice if you're lucky. Some bakers tried sifting them out. Others gave up and called it extra protein. Famine has a way of rewriting the recipe. In lean times, even mugs are too valuable to waste. Bread gets dried into hard-tack brick-like, teeth-breaking slabs that double as dinner and home defense. Soak it in ale, chew, pretend, and maybe weep quietly. You hear talk of trenches, not the battlefield kind, but stale slabs of bread used as edible plates. They soak up stew, catch drips, and then get eaten, tossed, or fed to pigs. The rich call it clever. The poor call it food. The pigs have no comment. Feast days bring hope. A priest blesses a stack of loaves arranged like a leaning tower of carbs. The poor gather, eyes bright, prayers whispered. Maybe this bread is better. Maybe not. One bite says it all. Mold doesn't kneel to holy water. Sometimes miracles happen. A harvest goes well. The flour's white, soft, cleanish. The bread is sweet, and for a fleeting moment, life feels almost kind. Then you hear a scream. The rats found the grain again. Back to bark, beans, and powdered acorns. Bread that tastes like sadness and regret. Still, people keep eating. A neighbor jokes that green bread means good luck if you survive the night. Others boast their ancestors lived off rotting loaves for weeks. It's not just survival. It's sport. Even when bread turns dangerous, no one stops. Bakers are sometimes punished, paraded through the streets with chains of stale bread around their necks. Public shame and fungal carbs together at last. But the grain's still bad, the oven's still ancient, and hunger still waits. Bread here is more than food. It's a symbol, a prayer, a superstition baked into every crumb. You watch a mother tuck away a crust for her child. An old man pockets a heel for later. Ritual lives in the bite, and history hides in the cracks. As the baker's apprentice lifts a cloth off tomorrow's dough, you wonder what's sleeping inside. Yeast? Mold? Something nameless and bold? The dough rises, shudders, and slumps. Tomorrow it might be bread. Or not, but tonight you've eaten, you've survived. In this crumbling world where even a crust can curse you, that counts as victory. Asterisk, you scrape the mold off the butter with the edge of a wooden spoon, watching it curl like pale moss. There's no ceremony to it, just a practiced flick of the wrist. Everyone does it. No one says a word. You spread it over your bread, which has now gone fully rigid overnight, and tell yourself it's better than nothing. Breakfast is eaten. In silence, broken only by the crunch of crumbs and the occasional cough from someone still recovering from yesterday's meal. You sip thin ale to wash it all down, because the water isn't safe, and even a weak brew is less likely to kill you. The day begins with a belly not full, but occupied, and that's good enough. Out in the village square, the market begins. To stir, baskets of wilted greens appear first, cabbages with their outer leaves peeled away like secrets, leeks streaked with dirt, onions so old they sprout from both ends. Root vegetables dominate. Turnips, parsnips, things dug up from a cold. Reluctant earth and chewed into submission. They're boiled, usually. Sometimes roasted if you're lucky, though roasting costs firewood, and firewood costs labor. You eye a barrel of apples, their skins blotchy, pocked with bruises and worms. Still, a sweet apple can feel like a gift from the gods, even if it's halfway to cider. You bite into one, hopeful. It's soft. You chew anyway. Most fruits are seasonal, fleeting, and never quite fresh. Preserving them is a race against time. Some are dried, others boiled down into thick syrups or jellies so sour they make your teeth sing. And then, of course, there's the cider fermented, sharp and suspiciously cloudy. But it's safer than water and kinder than ale. By midday. The smell of cooking dreffs from hearths and corner smoke. Onions may be a scrap of meat if someone's had luck trapping a rabbit or coaxing a chicken into sacrifice. Stews are the default, mostly because they can hide sins. A good pot of pottage can stretch a handful of ingredients for days. Grain, beans, herbs, greens, bones. And if it turns sour, just add more salt and pretend it's supposed to taste. That way, sometimes the pot is never truly emptied, just added to. A living brew that changes from day to day, like a diary of survival. One spoonful could contain 3 different meals and 2 weeks of history that you take your portion from a bubbling cauldron at the edge of the village square. It smells ... complex. A bit of smoke, a hint of sage, a vague suggestion of something that once had legs. The texture is uneven. The taste changes with every bite. Something chewy, something slimy, something spicy. You try not to ask questions. In the background, a child throws up quietly behind a hay cart. No one reacts. There is talk of sweet things, of coarse honey cakes and custards, spiced puddings and candied fruits, but those are fantasies for feast days and noble tables. For you, sweetness is a crust of honeyed bread, if the bees were kind this year. More often, dessert is just ... not dying. Still, there's celebration in small things. You share your meal with others, passing bowls, swapping stories, making jokes about the rat you nearly ate last week. Laughter comes easier on a full stomach, even if the contents are questionable. Afternoon fades into evening. The sun sinks, casting the village in long orange shadows. The ovens are stoked again for tomorrow's bread. Someone begins singing an old song about a baker and a bad batch of rye. You hum along, half-heartedly. You find yourself back at the kitchen hearth, the coals glowing, the smells of wood smoke and sour milk hanging in the air. The last meal of the day is humble: a wedge of cheese, a heel of bread, maybe a scrap of dried meat if you're lucky. You chew slowly, thoughtfully, remembering every course of the day. You've survived again. And here, in this strange, stubborn world where food is more foe than friend, that's enough. You lie down near the embers, your stomach full-ish, your thoughts tangled in dreams of better meals and safer times. But deep down, you know this. In the Middle Ages, eating isn't pleasure. It's a gamble, a ritual. And sometimes when the bread doesn't crawl and the meat doesn't bite back, it's a quiet, forgotten joy. The fire crackles. A dog whines in its sleep. Your eyes close. Tomorrow, the bread will rise again. The pot will boil again. And you'll eat, laugh, suffer, and endure again. Because survival here is both burden and badge of honor. Some say there was once a monk who misgot a lamprey and died foaming at the mouth before the psalms had finished. Others whisper of a traveling merchant who brought back dried sea fish from a distant port, only to poison half a town with a single stew. You don't know if these stories are true. But then again, you've seen enough to believe anything is possible. When it comes to food, what's strange is how people keep eating, despite the risks, despite the stories, despite the way a bad fish can turn your insides against you. There's a kind of stubborn defiance in it, a silent pact with your own stomach. Maybe it's pride, maybe it's madness, or maybe it's just the simple knowledge that there is no other choice. You chew slowly, always carefully, never entirely trusting what's on your plate. There are efforts to improve the odds. Prayers before meals, charms hung above the door, a sprig of rosemary tucked behind the ear when cooking fish, said to drive out evil humors. Some cooks won't touch eel on a full moon. Others won't stir fish soup counterclockwise. You smile at these rituals, but deep down you follow them. 2. Just in case, you recall once tasting a herring smoked so well it sang in your mouth, salty, sweet, sharp with alder wood and patience. For a moment, it felt like more than food. It felt like victory. But those moments are rare. More often, you eat quickly, quietly, scraping every bit of flesh from the bone, sucking marrow from the spine, tossing the heads to the dogs. Nothing wasted. Ever doubt in the monasteries, the fish rules are taken even more seriously. The church forbids meat on fast days, but the loopholes are vast. Beavers, for example, are declared fish by papal decree. After all, they live in water. Otters, too, if one is clever enough. Even barnacle geese, believed by some to grow from driftwood, are fair game during Lent. It's a theology of convenience, wrapped in feathers and scales. You chuckle at the idea of such arguments, but only mildly. When you're hungry enough, you don't care whether your supper once swam or waddled. You just eat. And thank God for the loophole. As the day winds down, the kitchen settles into a warm, smoky hush. The pots are scraped, the fish bones buried in the garden, the floors swept with a bundle of ash-laced straw. Outside, the river reflects the last light of dusk like tarnished silver. You step into the evening air, your breath rising like incense. Into the cooling sky. Your belly is full, not comfortably, but sufficiently, and that's enough to be grateful for. A thin sliver of moon peeks through the clouds. Somewhere nearby, a frog croaks, and you wonder vaguely what it would taste like fried in butter. You shake the thought away, not because it's strange, but because you know one day you might find out. And so, you walk home through the mud, your shoes heavy, your thoughts heavier. You pass neighbors who nod, faces worn but alive. Each of you carries the same quiet knowledge, that to live here is to eat carefully, cook skillfully, and hope fervently, not for flavor, not for joy, but for survival. In the medieval world, there is no such thing as a simple meal. Every bite is a wager. Every supper a sermon, and every empty bowl a story yet to be told. Asterisk, these are rare, but the fear lingers, growing with every new story. More common are the outbreaks of sickness after a bad catch. Whole villages laid low by what should have been a feast. The healer comes muttering over bowls of foul-smelling herbs, and sometimes there is nothing to do but wait and pray. You see the role of faith in all this. The church dictates when you can eat fish, but it also provides a measure of comfort. The local priest blesses the catch on feast days, crossing himself as sprinkles holy water on the riverbank. Some say this protects the village from sickness, that the saints watch over the fishes and the cooks. Others aren't so sure, remembering times when the blessing failed and the river brought only grief. Not all fish come from the river. Some are raised in man-made ponds tended by monks who have made an art of breeding carp, pike, and tench. The ponds are quiet, green with algae, the fish fat and sluggish. These are highly prized, sometimes even traded for silver or rare spices. You visit a monastery once, marveling at the size of the fish, the care with which the monks clean and prepare. Each one, the taste is better, cleaner somehow. But even here, there are dangers. Waterfowl drop waste in the pond, spreading disease. Sometimes a whole season's catch is lost to a mysterious illness. The water turning foul and lifeless overnight. You watch the women in the kitchen as they clean fish. Fingers nimble, eyes sharp for bones and parasites. Every fish is opened, checked, and if anything looks off, an odd color, a strange smell, it's tossed to the dogs or buried in the garden. You've seen the look on a mother's face as she discards a whole day's catch. Her eyes hard with worry. Wasting food is agony, but poisoning the family is worse. On market days, you see the traveling fish sellers, their wagons piled high with barrels of preserved fish. The smell reaches you before you see them, sharp, sour, a warning that lingers in the air. Some villagers crowd around, desperate for a taste of something different. Others hold their noses and walk the other way, remembering past illnesses, old warnings. You buy a small piece just to see and find it chewy, salty, and oddly metallic. Still, it fills your stomach, and that's what matters. There's a strange pride in surviving on such food. You share stories with friends of the worst fish you've eaten, the oddest creatures pulled from the river. One man claims to have swallowed a fish still alive. If another boasts of a soup so thick with bones, it could stand up a spoon. Laughter echoes through the kitchen, masking the fear that always lingers at the edges of hunger. Historians still argue whether the dangers of medieval fish were as great as the old stories claim, or if the worst tales were simply exaggerations. Cautionary fables passed down to keep children close to home. Some say the river was cleaner, the fish healthier before industry and population grew. Others point to the records, outbreaks of sickness, sudden deaths, the endless struggle to preserve what nature so often tries to reclaim. The truth, as always, is slippery, elusive, swimming just out of reach. At the end of the day, you sit by the riverbank, feet dangling in the cool water, the taste of salt and smoke lingering on your tongue. The world is quiet, save for the gentle splash of fish rising for flies, the distant call of a heron. You watch the light fade, the water darkening to a sheet of silver under the rising moon. Tomorrow will bring new risks, new meals, new stories. But for now, you are full, you are safe, and the river sings you to sleep with its old familiar lullaby. A reminder that even in a world of rotten poison, life finds a way. You find yourself lingering at the edge of the bustling market, drawn not by the fresh foods, which, as you know by now, are rarely as fresh as they look, but by the intoxicating cloud of scents drifting from the spice merchant's cart. For a moment, your world brightens. Nutmeg, cinnamon, black pepper, saffron, and ginger. Each scent distinct, layered on the heavy summer air like a patchwork quilt. It's easy to forget just for a heartbeat the sour tang of rotten fish or the bitter aftertaste of last night's cheese when these magical powders and seeds are near. But as you move closer, squinting at the merchant's painted jars, you remember the truth of medieval food. Spices are a shield, a disguise, and sometimes a threat all their own. The market is a riot of noise and color. Housewives haggle over onions and turnips. Boys chase stray chickens. And somewhere the butcher shouts about a fresh delivery. But the spice stall is quieter, almost reverent, as if those who gather here know they're touching something rare and strange. Spices are not simply seasonings. They're medicine, status symbol, and a form of medieval alchemy. One that can rescue. A ruined stew, impress a noble guest, or if you're unlucky, tip the scales towards sickness instead of health. You watch the merchant's hands, ringed, stained with turmeric and cloves. As he measures out pinches and handfuls, every motion deliberate, every grain counted. In a world where most food is bland or worse, the promise of flavor is a powerful temptation. Black pepper, worth more than its weight in silver, can turn a suspicious slab of meat into something almost desirable. Cinnamon and nutmeg hide the tang of spoiled fruit. Ginger and mustard cover up the aftertaste of fish that's seen too many days in the sun. The irony, of course, is that for most, spices are never used to make good food taste better. They're insurance camouflage for the edible. Mysteries fattened up on your plate. A stew bubbling on the fire needs more than just salt to make it palatable, especially if it's made with yesterday's leftovers or the week's offcuts. So you see cooks reaching for their precious jars, grinding seeds with heavy stones, sprinkling powders in generous clouds, their eyes fixed on the faces of those who will eat the meal. Does it taste right, or does it simply taste less wrong? There are moments when the disguise is successful. You sit at a long wooden table, a bowl of spicy pottage, steaming before you. The first bite is fire and warmth, black pepper stinging your tongue, cloves and allspice leaving their fragrant mark on your breath. The meat, thankfully, is almost an afterthought, soft, yielding, and anonymous beneath the onslaught of flavor. You close your eyes and imagine yourself somewhere else. A bustling city in Italy, a palace in distant Baghdad, a place where spices flow like rain and everything is new. But there's danger lurking beneath the glamour. Not every spice jar is as pure as it looks. You've heard stories whispered at dusk of merchants who cut their saffron with powdered marigold or dried grass, who pad out cinnamon with ground nutshells, or chalk. Sometimes in the greed to make a handful of gold stretch further, they add things far worse. Poisonous seeds, dust swept from the floor, even ground-up stones. It's not just about being cheated. It's about risking your life with every sprinkle. Historians still argue whether the average medieval cook ever tasted true cinnamon, or whether the stuff in Moss kitchens was an ever-changing gamble. The risks go beyond fraud. Some spices themselves are dangerous, even when genuine. Long pepper, rare and potent, can numb your mouth and unsettle your stomach. Certain roots imported from faraway lands are potent medicines in the right dose, but toxic if misused. You see old women in the market muttering over jars of henbane or mandra prized, as much for their ability to heal as for their potential to harm. A single pinch in a pot might soothe a cough or send a dinnerito convulsions. The boundary between medicine and poison is as thin as the paper that lines the merchants' jars. Yet the allure remains. You see noble women bargaining for sugar so rare that it's considered a spice grown to dust and sprinkled over pastries or fruit. There are households where candy ginger is offered to guests as a treat, a sign of wealth and sophistication. At feast days, cooks strain to impress, adding layers of spice to every dish. Peppered venison, saffron rice, spiced wine, and honeyed pears dusted with cinnamon. The colors alone are mesmerizing. Golden yellow, deep red, emerald green from parsley. Or mint. For a brief shining moment, everyone forgets the darkness that hovers at the edge of every meal. But you know, and so does every careful cook, that too much can be as bad as too little. Some nights you taste a stew so heavily spiced that it burns your mouth, leaving your tongue tingling for hours. You wonder if the cook is hiding something worse than a bit of rot. The strong flavors cover more than just spoilage. They hide a desperation, fear, and the endless need to make do with less. You help in the kitchen one day, watching as the cook grinds pepper in a heavy mortar. The peppercorns are hard, tough to break, and the dust makes you sneeze, the sensation sharp and bright. She adds it to a pot of meat already simmering with garlic and onions, then throws in a handful of mustard seeds, crushing them under her palm. The aroma is so powerful it makes your eyes water. But the taste is what matters. Bold, masking the tang off old fat and the strange GY note that clings to every cut. Outside, a neighbor boasts of his own recipe. A stew so hot with ginger and horseradish that no one can taste what's in it. You could boil a shoe in this, he laughs, spooning out a portion for you to try. You accept out of politeness, feeling the burn spread down your throat, your eyes streaming. For a moment, you forget everything but the heat. The market brings news of new spices all the time. A traveler shows off grains of paradise, tiny seeds with a sharp, almost peppery flavor. Another merchant offers cardamom wrapped in a scrap of silk, the pods green and fragrant. You hear of merchants crossing deserts and mountains, risking bandits and storms, just to bring a sack of spice to the city gates. Some never return. Those who do tell stories of places where cinnamon trees line the roads, where pepper grows wild, and where saffron is harvested by the pound. These are dreams more than reality, but they give hope. Something to imagine as you stir another pot of stew and wonder if it will be enough. Yet for all the mystery and adventure, there's a dark side to the trade. Some spices are fought over, their roots controlled by powerful merchants and greedy princes. Prices rise and fall with every war, every rumor of pirates or plague. Sometimes entire cities go without pepper for years, forced to rely on local herbs, sage, thyme, mint, and parsley to flavor their food. The loss is more than just taste. It's a blow to pride and prestige. You see the disappointment on the cook's face as she settles for a handful of bitter herbs instead of the bright gold of imported saffron. The fascination with color is almost as strong as the obsession with flavor. Medieval cooks used spices to dye their dishes, turning bland stews into spectacles of yellow, red, or even green. Saffron and turmeric make rice and pastries glow, while kochel, imported from far away, stains desserts of brilliant crimson. Sometimes the color is the only clue to what's inside. You taste a golden custard, expecting something sweet, only to find it sharp and peppery. Surprise is part of the game, but sometimes color betrays. A friend brings a bright yellow sauce to the table, boasting of its richness. You taste it, only to gag on the bitterness of burnt turmeric, the flavor so strong it drowns out everything else. Someone else tries to mask moldy bread with a dusting of cinnamon, but the aroma only makes the underlying staleness more obvious. Not every disguise works, and the cleverest tricks often fail in the end. You see how closely flavor is tied to class. For the wealthy, spice is a symbol, proof of status and access to the world beyond the village. Their kitchens glitter with jars and bottles, the air always thick with exotic scents. For the poor, spice is hope, a way to stretch a meal a little further, or make something edible out of scraps and cast-offs. You notice the quiet envy in the eyes of a servant as she grinds pepper for her master's table, knowing she'll never taste more than a stray grain or two. But sometimes the simplest flavors are the best. On a cold night, you share a bowl of soup thickened with barley and brightened by a handful of fresh parsley. There's no pepper, no cinnamon, no costly color, just the sharp green taste of something alive. For a moment, the world is simple, the risks forgotten, and the meal is a gift, not a gamble. Still, as you drift off to sleep, the scents linger in your memory, sharp, sweet, burning, comforting. The world of medieval food is one of endless risk and constant adaptation, but also of invention, surprise, and fleeting moments of joy. Next time you see the spice merchant in the market, you nod in quiet recognition, understanding that in this world every jar holds both danger and delight. You wake to the sound of distant bells and the sweet promise of something rare, fruit glistening. In the early morning sun, brought in woven baskets to the village market. There's a hush about the fruit stalls, an almost sacred air, as if the people gathered around the table sense that they're in the presence of something precious and fleeting. For most, fruit is a dream, a rumor of sweetness, a fleeting bite of luxury that comes and goes with the seasons, leaving hunger and longing in its wake. You drift toward the busiest corner of the market, eyes drawn to the riot of color, apples stacked in rough pyramids, pears wrapped in leaves, a single cluster of grapes, shining like jewels. A wealthy merchant dressed in linens that mark her. As someone from the manor house inspects each piece with a frown, turning them over and handing them back if she finds even the smallest blemish. For her, fruit is both symbol and sustenance, a sign that she has connections and coin. For most, fruit is more distant, only to be dreamed of or snatched in secret from a neighbor's tree if hunger bites hard enough. The reality is, of course, far less golden than the market display suggests. Most medieval fruit isn't the rosy, unblemished perfection you might imagine. The apples are often pockmarked and small, the pears tough and gritty, the cherries sour and quick to spoil. Worms find them first. Birds peck holes before they ever ripen. By the time the fruit reaches your hands, it's usually bruised, battered, and beginning to collapse under its own weight. Still, you don't complain. You know what it took to bring this fruit here. A season of prayers, a fight against hail and drought, and endless patience. You reach for a small plum, rolling it in your hands, feeling the sticky residue left by 100 fingers before yours. You wipe it on your sleeve and take a cautious bite. The taste a shock of tartness, almost metallic, with just a hint of real sweetness near the pit. For a moment, you understand why fruit is so prized, why the church uses it as a symbol of temptation and paradise. Why poets sing of golden apples and lovers compare kisses to cherries. It's not just food, it's hope in edible form. Not all are allowed to enjoy it freely. In some places, the manor's orchards are off limits to common folk, patrolled by sharpied stewards and dogs that bark at the scent of intruders. You hear tales of young boys caught sneaking into the groves at dusk, chased off with sticks or worse. The forbidden's fruit always tastes sweeter, they say, and the price of being caught is often more than a bruised shin. Historians still argue whether these rules were really enforced or whether most landowners turned a blind eye when harvests were good. Either way, you watch your step near the orchard walls. You notice, too, that fruit isn't always what it seems. Some of the apples in the market are carved from wood, polished and painted to look more tempting than the real thing. Others are made of wax, brought out only for feast days to impress visiting guests. The deception is both practical and symbolic, a way to hint at bounty when real bounty is in short supply. You watch children eye the wooden fruit, fingers itching to steal. A bite, only to be disappointed when their teeth meet nothing but splinters. For most fruit is preserved, transformed, or disguised to make it last longer. The market offers dried apples, wrinkled and dark as old leather, and plums shriveled to the size of marbles. There's candied quince, if you're lucky enough to have, sugar or honeyed pears stored in clay jars, the syrup thick and sticky. Sometimes fruit is turned into vinegar or wine. The transformation as much about necessity as pleasure. You taste the sip of sour cherry wine, the flavor sharp and unpredictable, the aftertaste lingering on your tongue long after the cup is empty. The process of preserving fruit is laborious and rarely foolproof. Dried fruit attracts weevils, honey ferments in the jar, and pickled. Plum sometimes turn to mush overnight. You see women boiling down apples in great copper pots, the air sweet and thick with steam, their arms aching from hours of stirring. The reward is a handful of jam or a spoonful of paste, enough to sweeten a winter morning, but never enough to banish hunger entirely. Fermentation is as much accident as art. You hear of barrels of cider exploding in the cellar, the pressure building until the staves crack and the liquid floods the floor. Sometimes the resulting drink is crisp and refreshing, a rare treat. More often it's cloudy, sour, and full of floating bits that no one bothers to strain. You drink anyway, grateful for anything that takes the edge off the taste of salted fish or bitter herbs. You notice how fruit marks the passing of the seasons, the rhythm of medieval life. In spring, the first strawberries appear, tiny and bright, eaten in handfuls before they ever reach the kitchen. In summer, cherries dangle from high branches, tempting every child in the village to climb and risk a fall. Autumn brings apples and pears, the orchards alive with laughter and the thump of fruit hitting the earth. Winter is the season of longing when the last shriveled apple is doled out with ceremony, a reminder that nothing lasts forever. You join a family for a midsummer feast, the table laden with fruit in every form, stewed cherries, apples roasted in the fire, and a pie filled with pears and thickened with breadcrumbs. The pie is more crust than filling, but you savor every bite. The sweetness a balm for days of sour bread and sharp cheese. The children fight over the last slice, the parents, smiling as they remember their own childhood scrambles. For a brief moment, the hardships of the world fade, replaced by the simple pleasure of something good, shared, and savored. But you see the risks too. Some fruits picked too soon or left too long turn poisonous or simply inedible. Mushrooms are especially treacherous. What looks like a harmless button can turn deadly if misidentified. Even apples can harbor danger, especially if they've fallen and begun to ferment on the ground. A careless bite can leave your stomach in knots for days. You remember the warnings from old women in the village, their voices thick with caution. Never eat berries you don't know, they say, or leave the red mushrooms for the witches. Some tales are rooted in truth, others in fear and legend. Historians still debate how many deaths were truly caused by poisonous fruit and how many were simply blamed on the mysterious forces that rule the medieval world. Sometimes the very act of sharing fruit is charged with meaning. Lovers exchange apples as tokens. Parents slip a piece of pear to a sick child, and neighbors trade dried plums as gifts at harvest. Fruit is precious because it's fleeting, a promise that tomorrow might be sweeter than today. You see the way eyes light up at the sight of the first cherries, or how an old man hoards a single perfect apple, turning it over and over in his hands as if it holds the secret to happiness. Yet for all its symbolism, fruit is never far from the ratch of spoilage. The baskets in the market look tempting in the morning, but by afternoon the flies have found them, and the smell of rot creeps in around the edges. Some buyers are fooled by clever sellers who rotate the fruit, hiding the bruised and the mushy beneath a layer of fresher picks. You hear of tricks. Apples robbed with grease to keep them shiny. Pears dipped in wine to mask spots. Even dried fruit dyed with madder to look more appealing. But not all fruit is meant for eating. Some is set aside as offerings to saints, to ancestors, to the spirits believed to guard the orchard. A bowl of apples might be left on a chapel step, a handful of cherries placed on a grave. The act is both faith and insurance, a way to honor the forces that bring life and death in equal measure. You see the cleverness of medieval cooks, always searching for ways to stretch the harvest. Apple cores become vinegar, plum pits are boiled for dye, and even the peels are fed to livestock or added to compost. Nothing is wasted because every scrap counts in a world that gives and takes so unpredictably. The stranger stories you hear are of fruit that isn't fruit at all. At some grand banquets, the table is set with illusion foods. Turnips carved and dyed to look like apples. Marzipan shaped into cherries. Even cheese molded into the form of grapes. It's a game of appearances, a way for cooks to show off their skills and for hosts to dazzle their guests. You take a bite of what you think is a pear, only to find it's made of almond paste and honey. The sweetness overwhelming, the deception as satisfying as the flavor itself. As the sun sets, you sit beneath a gnarled apple tree, the ground littered with windfalls. You watch a pair of children hunting for the last good fruit, their laughter rising above the hum of insects and the distant ring of church bells. For a moment, the world feels abundant, the hardships of hunger and spoilage far away. But you know, as everyone here knows, that this sweetness is fleeting, as vulnerable to rot and ruin as anything else in the medieval world. You close your eyes, savoring the memory of your morning plum, and wonder what dreams the night will bring. Maybe tomorrow there will be more fruit, or maybe the baskets will be empty, and the market will be filled only with longing. In a place where even sweetness can turn sour overnight, every bite is a small act of hope, and every harvest is a promise whispered on the wind. You return to the village after a long morning's work, hands cold and stomach hollow, already scanning. the smoky air for the telltale scent of something cooking. If there is a single thread that weaves every class, every season, and every hardship together, it is the humble stew, boiling, bubbling, sometimes burning, and almost always hiding secrets beneath its surface. The medieval pot is a mystery, a cauldron of hope and necessity, and for most people it is dinner, lunch, and sometimes even breakfast rolled into one ever-changing dish. You edge into the kitchen, drawn by the warmth of the hearth, and the rhythmic thud of a wooden spoon against a battered iron pot. The cook barely glances up as you approach, her face stir with sweat, hair wild from the morning rush. She's a conductor in this daily symphony of simmering, scraping, and salvaging. Every meal is a challenge. What can be stretched, disguised, revived, or revived again? You peer into the pot. What do you see? It's never the same. Sometimes there are shreds of cabbage, hunks of turnip, a floating bone from a Sunday roast. Sometimes yesterday's barley porridge is reincarnated, thickening the soup until it stands up in lumps. Bread crusts bob alongside beans. Garlic cloves ride the surface, and the odd speck of green promises that someone found a handful of herbs out by the hedge. No one questions what goes in. You know better than to ask. This is not just food. It's alchemy, transforming scraps into sustenance. Every medieval kitchen has its own rules, its own traditions. Some start their stew at dawn and let it bubble. For days, adding a ladle of fresh water whenever it gets low, and tossing in whatever turns up. Bits of salted pork, the last withered carrot, even yesterday's cold congealed broth. A true perpetual stew. The pot is never truly empty, and every mouthful is a taste of history. You remember your first spoonful, hesitant and hopeful. The taste was complicated. There's comfort in the warmth, but also something wild and unpredictable. A bite of something you can't quite place. A sourness that hints at fermentation, or the sharp edge of a spice you didn't expect. You glance at your neighbor who winks knowingly and stirs her own bowl, careful to avoid the chunk of bone lurking at the bottom. Everyone here learns to eat first and ask questions later. There's pride in the art of stretching food. The cook boasts of turning a single chicken into 3 days' worth of dinners. Roasted on the first night, picked over and simmered with onions the second, and the bones boiled into a thin, milky soup on the third. Sometimes a clever hand can take nothing more than beans and wild garlic and create a stew that sticks to your ribs and keeps you warm long after the fire asterisk burns out. But there are perils lurking in the pot. Not every ingredient is harmless, and not every scrap is safe. Sometimes a bit of meat goes in that's seen better days, and the smell of rot is disguised with a pinch of mustard or a glug of vinegar. You recall the cook muttering a quick prayer as she adds a handful of old sausage, eyes closed, fingers crossed that the long boil will drive out whatever evil might be lurking within. Historians still argue whether most illnesses blamed on bad air were in fact the quiet work of spoiled stew eaten too quickly in the darkness of a winter's night. Some kitchens, especially in poorer homes, rely on whatever can be scavenged or begged. You've seen stews bulked out with foraged greens, dandelion nettles, wild sorrel, and even mushrooms plucked from the shady side of a fallen log. There's always a risk, of course. You hear stories of whole families brought low by a handful of poisonous mushrooms, misidentified in haste or desperation. In one village, a stew made with the wrong berries left the children sick for days. And now no one picks from that patch anymore, but the stew must go on. You join the rhythm of kitchen life, learning to chop, stir, and taste. Sometimes there are moments of delight. A savory burst of smoked bacon, a carrot sweeter than you expected, a thick slice of last week's bread, softened by hours in the bubbling broth, Other times, you crunch down on something unidentifiable. A bit of grit, a sliver of bone, or the scorched remains of last night's turnip. Asterisk. Everyone pretends not to notice. You notice how soup and stew bring people together, not just to eat, but to share news, laughter, and rumors. Around the hearth, stories are traded with spoons and hunks of bread. A traveling tinker describes a stew he tasted in the next town over, thick with peas and fleck with saffron. An old widow insists that her secret is a spoonful of beer and a bay leaf from her own bush. You realize that in a world where nothing is certain and everything's at risk, the stew put asterisk is a kind of anchor, a place to gather and remember that at least tonight no one will go hungry. There are, of course, social rules and subtle hierarchies. The Lord's kitchen might simmer a rich venison stew fragrant with wine and spices, while the servants are left with cabbage and barley, heavy on the cabbage. You catch a glimpse of a feast day in the manor, a cauldron brimming with fowl and leeks, carrots cut into ribbons, the broth shining with golden fat. Servants stand by waiting to collect what's left for their own meager asterisk supper. You can't help but wonder if the flavor of privilege lingers, or if hunger makes every mouthful taste the same in the end. Not every experiment is a success. One evening, the cook decides to stretch the stew with a few handfuls of old lentils, not realizing they've gone musty in storage. The whole pot is tinged with a bitterness that not even the strongest herbs can mask. You eat in silence, grateful for the warmth, but longing for something fresh. On another day, someone drops in a smoked fish, an asterisk. The result is a meal so pungent. The cats won't come near the hearth for hours. Still, you eat. You always eat because the alternative is hunger, and the memory of an empty belly is sharper than any odd taste or chewy texture. You see children sew up broth with dry crusts, men slurping greedily after a day in the fields, and old women adding secret handfuls of whatever they can spare. No one wastes a drop. Some families have superstitions about what can and can't go into the pot. On holy days, meat is asterisk avoided, replaced by eggs, cheese, or even roasted nuts. During lean times, you've seen stew pots that are little more than boiled water, with a few scraps of onion and a pinch of salt. Yet even these, sipped slowly, can keep hope alive through a cold winter night. The cleverest cooks know how to transform the ordinary into the extraordinary. You taste a green soup made from nettles and wild garlic, thickened with a bit of yesterday's bread, and marvel at the bright herbal flavor. You see a peasant asterisk woman roast parsnips before adding them to the stew, their sweetness deepened by the fire. Every spoonful is a lesson in patience, thrift, and ingenuity. Historians still debate whether the endless variety of medieval stews was born of necessity or creativity. Some say the perpetual pot was simply a way to prevent waste, while others see it as proof of a culture that prized innovation and adaptability. You suspect both are true. The best meals come from kitchens where every cook is a little bit brave and a little asterisk bit desperate. There's always a sense of discovery in each new bowl. Sometimes you find a treasure, a chunk of tender meat, a sweet pearl of barley, a sliver of dried plum hidden at the bottom. Other times you fish out a bit of bone or an unidentifiable glob, and you simply shrug and keep eating. It's all part of the mystery, and in a way that's the point. You never know what you'll get, but you know you'll get something. On special occasions, the cook adds a dash of wine, a spoonful of vinegar, or an asterisk sprinkle of imported spice. The whole village gathers, bowls in hand, waiting for their share. The youngest get the first spoonfuls, the oldest next, and the rest follow in order. There is ceremony in this, a sense of fairness and tradition, even when the ingredients are anything but noble. The stew is also a place for confessions and secrets. Around the hearth, voices grow low as tales are told, of lost loves, hidden. treasures or dreams of faraway lands. The steam rises, the fire crackles, an asterisk for a moment. Everyone is warm, fed, and just a little bit hopeful. As the night deepens, the last scraps are scooped from the bottom of the pot. The cook fills it with water, ready to start again at dawn. The perpetual stew is a living thing, fed by hunger and hope, always changing, but always the same. You curl up near the dying embers, stomach full, heart quiet, and dream of tomorrow's bowl. Another mystery, another meal, another chance to survive. The fire dies low in the hearth, and you're left with that familiar medieval asterisk dilemma. You're still thirsty. Bread and stew have settled heavy in your belly, and your lips are dry as dust. You'd think water would be the answer. So basic and abundant, it almost escapes notice in the modern world. But here in the crooked houses and winding alleys of the Middle Ages, water is a gamble, a game of trust, luck, and more often than not regret. You watch as a child trudges to the village well, buckets swinging from a splintered pole. The well is the heart of the settlement, a place of gossip, asterisk laughter, and occasionally panic. It's been here for generations. The stones slick with moss, the ropes rough and worn. Yet you can't help but wonder what's lurking beneath the surface. The well is open to the sky, exposed to every leaf, every bit of wind-blown dust, every accident. That happens above. You've heard tales of dead animals fished out in secret or worse. Stories of sick neighbors whose families pour the contents of chamber pots a little too close to the wellhead. The water, when it's drawn, looks innocent enough. Clear, cold, sometimes sweet, but always tinged with the scent of earth. You cup your hands and drink, savoring the moment before doubt creeps in. Sometimes there's a strange aftertaste, metallic, a bit like rusty nails, or a hint of mildew, a memory of last year's drought when the well ran low and what remained turned green and thick. Still, water is water. When you're thirsty, you drink, and you hope for the best. Some days, the village gets lucky. After a rainstorm, the well runs high and clear, and everyone lines up, buckets in hand, trading jokes and stories as they wait. On other days, especially in the heat of summer, the water tastes old, stale, as if it's been sitting too long in the belly of the earth. You hear the elders warn against drawing from the well during the first storm after a long dry spell, claiming that the runoff brings illness, dragging down filth from the surface and stirring up whatever's been sleeping at the bottom. You learn quickly that the well is only one of many risks. In the towns and cities, water comes from public fountains or is sold by vendors who fill their barrels at dawn and wheel them through the streets shouting their wares. You pass a fountain in a crowded square, the spout shaped like a lion's head, its mouth green with algae. The water splashes into a stone trough, cloudy with silt and the detritus of hundreds of hands. Sometimes a stray dog laps at the same spot where children fill their cups. You watch a vendor top off his barrel with a bucket dipped in the nearest stream, the water swirling with bits of straw and an occasional dead fish. The risk is obvious, but when the day is hot and your throat is dry, you take your chances. The rich have their own solutions. You glimpse a manor house with a cistern. On the roof, rainwater collected and filtered through sand and charcoal. The lady of the house boasts of her sweet water served chilled with slices of lemon or sprigs of mint. Yet even here accidents happen. A dead bird caught in the gutter, a cracked tankletting in the dust and bugs of summer. There's no true safety, just a sliding scale of risk. For most, water is never consumed as it is. The secret you learn is in the additives. Wine, ale, or even vinegar mixed into every cup to correct the dangers you cannot see. In every home, jugs of weak ale or watered wine stand ready on the table. You're surprised at how normal it feels to sip beer with breakfast or to add a splash of vinegar to your drink, the sharpness masking whatever might be lurking. The belief is simple. The alcohol or acid will kill what the well cannot. Historians still argue whether this practice was born of wisdom or just a lack of options, but everyone agrees that it's safer than trusting the water alone. You taste the difference every day. Weak ale is thin, almost sweet, with a low hum of alcohol that makes your head light if you drink too fast. Wine, especially the cheap stuff, is sharp and sour, often mixed with spices or honey to soften the blow. Children drink it too, their cups no different from yours, and you watch them giggle. As they sip, cheeks flushed and eyes bright. The strong stuff is saved for feast days and hard times. A bitter red that leaves your tongue numb and your worries for a moment far away. Sometimes the water's so foul that no amount of ale or wine will save it. In those moments, you boil it, filling the kitchen with steam and the heavy metallic scent of the pot. You see mothers stirring the boiling water, whispering prayers to saints for protection, then ladling it into cups to cool. Even then, the memory of sickness lingers. You hear stories of whole families struck down by bad water, fever sweeping. To the village, doctors prescribing herbs and fasting, the church billing too often. You learn to be cautious. Never drink from the stream after the rains. Avoid the shallow pond at the edge of the woods where animals gather and the water is always thick and green. If you must add wine, add ale, add vinegar. Do anything to change the taste, to drive away the memory of sickness. Still, thirst has a way of making you reckless. And on a hot day, you sometimes drink without thinking. The cold shock of water. A brief, guilty pleasure. There's a ritual to every cup. In the tavern, you raise your mug with the others, toasting good fortune and safe passage. The ale is dark, cloudy, flecked with bits of yeast and grain. Sometimes there's a sourness that makes you wheezy, a hint of rot that can't be masked. You ask the innkeeper for a fresh barrel, but he just shrugs. It's what we've got. The alternatives are worse. You see how water shapes life in the city. Washerwomen gather at the river, their hands raw and red from scrubbing clothes in the icy current. Children wade in the shallows, splashing and laughing, while the older boys cast nets for minnows and crayfish. Upstream, the tanners dump there. Foul rinses. The butchers toss scraps and blood into the current. You follow the flow, watching the water turn from bright and clean to brown and sluggish, the stink growing stronger with every mile. You remember the taste of truly fresh water, cold and clear from a mountain spring, the kind that runs over rocks and through roots, filtered by earth and time. It's a memory, nothing more. A story told by a traveler who claims he found such a spring in a distant valley. You listen, eyes closed, and imagine the taste, pure and bright, with no aftertaste of iron or fear. For now, you make do. Some homes have barrels set under the eaves to catch rainwater, the liquid sweet and light, if you're lucky, full of mosquito. Lavy, if you're not. Others draw from cisterns lined with lead, not knowing that the cure for one sickness is the cause of another. You see the stains on the stone, the crust of minerals at the edges, the way the water tastes different after a storm. Water is never just water. It's a source of life and a constant threat, a test of luck and a measure of resilience. You watch as people bless their cups, cross themselves before drinking, and whisper the names of saints. Asterisk in some places. They tie rags to the branches of a sacred tree, hoping for protection from the spirits that dwell in the well. Others carve runes into the stones around the spring, the marks fading year by year, but the hope never quite dying. Historians still debate how many medieval deaths were due to waterborne illness, how many fevers and plagues started with a single sip from a dirty cup. Some argue that the constant mixing of wine and ale made a real difference, while others point to the stubborn persistence of disease in every town and village. You know only that thirst is stronger than fear, and that every day brings a new decision, a new gamble. There's irony in it. You think how something so vital, so simple, can be both salvation and ruin. You remember the stories told by the fire, of knights poisoned by their enemies, of wells cursed by witches, of healers who claim to read the future in the ripples of a pond. In every tale, water is never just water. It is always more, sometimes a blessing, sometimes a curse. At the end of a long day, you pour yourself a cup, ale thinned with water, or water sweetened with a drop of wine. You raise it to your lips, the scent sharp, the taste uncertain. Still, you drink, grateful for the relief, for the way the liquid cools your throat and soothes your aching head. You know the risks, but you also know there's no way around them. In this world, every swallow is a leap of faith, every cup a wager against fate. You close your eyes, listening to the distant sounds of the village, the creak of the well, fell udder from the tavern, the hush of water running through the ditches. Tomorrow you'll draw from the well again, and tomorrow you'll hope it's safe. For now, you're content, your thirst quenched, your worries drifting away on the promise of sleep. You wake to the sound of empty bellies, a low, insistent rumble that rises from every bed and bench in the house. It's the season of want, that hungry space between harvests when last year's stores are gone, and the fields are little more than a hope shimmering on the horizon. In these times, when bread is scarce and stew is thin as river mist, you discover what it truly means to eat. For survival, famine foods, the old women call them. Those things you never touch when there's a choice, but cherish. Even celebrate when hunger gnaws your bones and the world outside is cold and unkind. You look to the kitchen for comfort, but find only a handful of shriveled onions, a scattering of dried beans, and the last puckered heel of bread hard as a brick. Everyone moves more slowly, saving their energy for work that cannot wait. Children pick through the ashes beneath the hearth for overlooked scraps. Even the cat eyes the crumbs with more interest than usual. You join the search. Hands busy with baskets and bags, rooting out whatever the latter has forgotten. Old cheese with more mold than milk, a jar of souring curds, a string of onions gone soft at the neck. It is in these lean days that the medieval world shows its true creativity. Every scrap matters. Asterisk. You scrape the last fat from the bottom-off pot and stir it into watery broth, stretching a single carrot into a meal for four. Bones, always precious, are boiled again and again until they yield every drop of strength, their marrow sucked, clean before they finally end up in the garden as fertilizer. You hear the cook mutter about how hunger sharpens the mind, and you find it's true. Your senses are keener, your nose quick to detect even the faintest hint of something edible. Out you go into the fields and forests, searching for what the land has left behind. Foraging becomes an art, part memory, part guesswork, and always a bit of risk. Nettles, dandelion, sorrel. These wild greens appear early and are bitter as regret, but you gather them anyway, filling your basket with leaves that sting your fingers, but promise a faint taste of spring. You boil them into soup, add a pinch of salt if you have it, and swallow the sour broth, telling yourself it's good for the blood. You learn to watch the hedge, searching for edible roots and shoots. Berdo, wild parsnip, and corrie. Plants you once ignored now become lifelines. You dig with a stick or your bare hands, scraping away earth and worms to find a pale, knobby root that might, with enough boiling, become something close to food. The first mouthful is always a surprise. Bitter, stringy, sometimes a little gritty, but filling in a way nothing else can be. Mushrooms tempt you with their abundance, but you know their dangers too well. Old women in the village tell stories of whole families struck down by a single wrong cap, their lips blue and their breath ragged by morning. Historians still argue whether the knowledge of safe mushrooms was passed down faithfully or was lost. In the panic of famine, you take no chances, sticking to the few you know, their shapes and colors etched in your memory like a prayer. The ponds and streams offer their own meager harvest. You set traps for frogs and eels, cast nets for minnows, and if luck is with you, catch a handful of snails clinging to the rocks. The snails are boiled with wild garlic, a broth green and pungent, their tiny bodies swallowed whole. It's a taste you never crave, but in times of want, it's food. And food is always a blessing. Acorns fall thick in the woods, and you gather, by the sackful, hands aching from bending and lifting. You know they must be prepared just right, soaked to draw out the bitterness, ground into meal, then mixed with whatever flour you can find. The bread they make is dense, heavy, almost gray, with a taste somewhere between wood and earth. You chew each bite slowly, grateful for the rough fullness it brings. When even these options run thin, you turn to the truly desperate foods. Bark from young trees, peeled and boiled to soften the tough fibers, makes a kind of porridge when ground and stirred into water. The taste is sharp, the texture fibrous, but it fills your belly even as it leaves your mouth dry. The same goes for roots of cattails scraped and boiled, then fried if there's a drop of fat left in the house. It is a strange, bland meal, but it keeps you moving. You notice how famine changes the very rhythm of life. Meals grow smaller and farther apart. Conversations at the table grow quieter, more focused on the food than the talk. You see how people's eyes linger on the smallest bite, how mothers hide an extra crust for the youngest, how old men refuse a second helping so the children can have more. There is a kind of grim solidarity and hunger, an understanding that every empty belly is a burden shared, and every meal, no matter how meager, is a victory. Not everything is foraged. Some foods are made by accident or born of desperation in the kitchen. Peasant cheese, soft, runny, and barely salted, is made from the last drops of milk and eaten before it turns sour. Thin ale brewed with a handful of leftover grain and whatever herbs are at hand is drunk warm, its taste half medicine, half consolation. Even the leaves from last year's cider are pressed into service, mixed with water, and boiled into a tart thin soup. You hear of families boiling shoe leather, softening it with hours of simmering, scraping away the worst, and chewing the tough strips until their jaws ache. It is more ritual than nourishment, a way to remind yourself that you'll do whatever it takes to see another spring. In these times, nothing is wasted. The grease from a roasting pan is saved and mixed with stale bread for a kind of fat pudding. The leaves from cabbage are layered and boiled again, even when they're limp and yellow. You see neighbors trading what little they have. A handful of dried beans for a slice of turnip, a bit of old cheese for a few onions. Hunger makes everyone generous and cunning in equal measure. Historians still argue about the true toll of famine. How many were lost? How many survived by grit, luck, or sheer inventiveness? There are records of mass hunger, of villages empty but for the oldest and the youngest, of journeys to the next town in search of food, only to find empty barns and shuttered doors. Yet there are also stories of miracles, a forgotten store of beans found just before starvation sets in, a spring that runs clear when all others dry up, or a neighbor who shares her last loaf without hesitation. The church offers what comfort it can. On feast days, the parish distributes thin GRL to the poorest, the priests praying over every bowl, as if faith might add substance to the soup. You watch as the hungry line up, bowls in hand, their faces gaunt, but their eyes shining with hope. Some believe that fasting brings blessings, that the hunger will be rewarded with a better harvest. Others simply endure counting the days until the fields turn green. Asterisk, you find yourself thinking about food all the time. Every chore is measured by the calories it might burn. Every journey weighed against what you might find along the way. Dreams are filled with feasts, roasted meat, sweet fruit, fresh bread. But you wake to the taste of wild greens and the memory of hunger. There are odd moments of joy, too. The first bite of a fresh wild strawberry found hidden in the grass is sweeter than any fruit you remember. A handful of roasted chestnuts gathered by the fire brings laughter and warmth even as the wind howls outside. You learn to savor the little things, to stretch every pleasure as far as it will go. Sometimes you hear of truly strange meals, recipes born in the crucible of desperation. Frog pie made with whatever frogs can be caught, mixed with nettles, and bound in a crust of bark flour. Boiled weeds with the last scrap of lard, eaten in silence as the snow falls outside. Even rats, if they can be caught, find their way into the pot. The meat tough but filling. The meal a secret shame and a private triumph. When spring finally comes and the first green shoots push through the thawing earth, you feel a surge of hope so sharp it's almost painful. You dig for wild leeks, pick the first dandelion greens, and dream of the first egg laid by the hen who survived the winter. The hunger doesn't vanish overnight, but it eases, replaced by a gratitude so deep you find yourself weeping for no reason at all. You remember the taste of famine long after your belly is full again. Every meal is tinged with memory, every harvest shadowed by the knowledge of how close you came to losing it all. There's a lesson in every empty pot, every clever recipe, every strange thing you put in your mouth and called food. You learn above all that survival is not about feasting, but about finding a way to endure, to hope, and to share what little you have with those who need it most. And so when you sit down to a real meal at last, thick bread, a bowl of hearty stew, a slice of sharp cheese, you eat slowly, reverently, each bite a reminder of how precious, how fragile, and how fiercely fought every morsel of life truly is. The sun hangs low and golden, lighting up the rough edges of the village, just as a bell tolls from the distant manor house. Tonight you're not scourging for nettles or boiling up wild roots. Tonight you're headed toward a feast, a noble banquet where the food is rumored to flow as freely as the wine. You can hardly believe your luck, though in the back of your mind you remember the wisdom passed down in every peasant home. Sometimes the greatest dangers wear the sweetest disguises. As you approach the manor, the world changes. The air is thick with the smell of roasting meat, spices, and honey, a perfume so foreign to your usual diet that it makes your stomach growl and your mouth water, even as your mind wonders what exactly is hidden beneath all those heady aromas. The manor itself looms large, its walls flickering with torchlight, the great door open and beckoning. You hesitate at the threshold, feeling the sharp divide between those who dine and those who wait outside for what's left. Inside, the noise is overwhelming. Laughter and music tumble through the hall, mingling with the clatter of knives and the shouts of servants rushing between tables. Long boards groan under the weight of platters piled high. Roast goose, glazed ham, spiced pies, sweetmeats dusted, with sugar and cinnamon. Wine flows from jugs into putter cups, spilling across the boards and soaking into the wood. For a moment you're dazzled, half believing you've stumbled into one of the fairy tales whispered by firelight during the hunger. Months. You find your seat, a narrow bench at the far end of the hall, with the other lower guests and a few servants lucky enough to be invited to the tail end of the feast. You're close enough to see the bounty, but not always to taste it. At the high table, the lord and lady dine on the freshest, finest foods, soft white bread, bright fruit, steaming venison, and fish brought in on horseback from distant lakes. Each dish is adorned with edible flowers, gilded with saffron, or glazed and thick. Shining sauces. You notice quickly, though, that appearances can deceive. The finest loaves cut for the nobility are white and soft, a luxury made possible by the best flour and the most careful milling. The bread served farther down is darker, rougher, sometimes still warm, but often tough from sitting out. The dishes, too, become less impressive the further you sit from the Lord's seat. Where the hideable gets the first carving from the roast, the rest of the bird is sent down in stages. The meat thinner, the bones sharper, the flavor sometimes more a memory than a promise. You watch the procession of servers carrying trenchers laden with the remainders of each course. These thick slabs of stale bread are meant to catch juices, soak up gravy, and when the meal is over, are offered to the poor or fed to the dogs. Some nights you're grateful just for the trencher. Its soggy, flavor-soaked mass is a meal unto itself, especially when hunger has sharpened your appreciation for every scrap. It's hard not to compare the feast before you with the memories of famine and thin stew. The room is warm, the fire blazing, and everywhere you look, there's something to taste. The air is alive with spice and laughter. Yet you notice that even here, not everything is as safe or as sumptuous as it seems. For every fresh platter, there's one that's been sitting just a bit too long. The fish, once so fragrant, grows rubbery and odd as it cools, its eyes dull, its flesh dry. The roast pork, cut and carved and passed from hand to hand, loses its shine and its charm as the fat congeals. The pies bursting with sweet or savory fillings sometimes hide surprises, bones, gristle, or the unmistakable tang of something that's just begun to turn. You see servants carrying away dishes with careful haste, hiding the worst bits beneath napkins or beneath the table. The kitchen knows its own secrets, and so do the dogs who gather just outside its door. Historians still argue whether the rich truly lived in luxury, or if even their banquets were a balancing act between show and survival. The truth, you suspect, lies somewhere in between. The wealth of the manor buys choice ingredients, but not always the wisdom to store or cook them safely. Salt and smoke disguise the earliest hints of rot, and heavy sauces and layers of spice mask more than just flavor. Still, there are moments of real delight. You taste a slice of honeyed ham, the meat tender and sweet, fig lays sticky on your fingers. You try a spoonful of almond pudding, rich and creamy, so different from the watery porridges you know. The wine is sharp and heady, warming your throat as it goes down. For a moment, you let yourself believe that hunger is just a memory, that the bounty of the hall is endless. But the hierarchy of the table is always there. As each course ends, the leftovers are gathered and distributed with careful ceremony. The best scraps go to favored servants, the next to children and widows, and the last to the poor, waiting at the kitchen door. You join the line bowl in hand, grateful for a spoonful of gravy or a chunk of cheese passed down from above. In these moments, you realize that even a crumb from the high table is worth more than the richest meal you could make at home. Sometimes you're lucky enough to be invited into the kitchen after the feast. Here, the atmosphere is different, busier, more urgent, the air heavy with heat and the clang of pots. The cooks, flushed and harried, toss scraps into great wooden tubs, sort bones from meat, and scrape the fat from roasting pans to be saved for tomorrow's meals. Nothing is wasted, not even the burned bits stuck to the bottom of a pot. You see how leftovers are reborn. Meat picked from bones is chopped and mixed with herbs for pies. Stale bread is soaked in broth to make pottages, and the odd piece of fruit is stewed with honey and served as dessert the next day. Even bones are safe for stock, simmered long into the night, the broth thick and golden by dawn. In the Mana's kitchen, leftovers are not a sign of failure, but a mark of resourcefulness and skill. Yet Despite all this care, food safety is never certain. The kitchen is crowded and warm, the air thick with steam and smoke. Flies gather at the windows, and every corner hides the risk of spoilage. Milk sour, cream turns, eggs go off in the blink of an eye. The cooks sniff, taste, and trust their instincts. But sometimes even the most careful hand can't keep sickness at bay. You hear stories, sometimes whispered, sometimes shouted, of banquets that ended in disaster. A bad batch of fish sending half the guests running to the garden. A pie so tainted with mold that the Lord himself fell ill. A cask of ale gone sour. In these moments, the dividing line between feast and famine blurs, and everyone is reminded that nature, not money, always has the final say. Outside, as the banquet winds down, the village gathers for what's left. Children swarm around the kitchen door, hoping for a sweet or a bone to gnaw. Old women barter for a crust of bread or a splash of wine. Even the poorest find something to carry home. A handful of beans, a wedge of cheese, a cup of broth. For one night at least, the whole village eats. The banquet's bounty does not last. By morning, the grand tables are empty, the platters scrubbed, the fire burned down to coals. The memory of fullness lingers, but hunger returns slow and steady as the sun climbing above the fields. You walk home in the pale dawn, pockets lined with a crust or two, grateful and already hungry again. You notice the strange democracy of leftovers, how the richest meal trickles down through the ranks, touching everyone in the manor and the village, even as it reminds you of the great chasm between rich and poor. You see how the joy of a feast is mingled with the tension of scarcity, how every crumb becomes more precious the further it travels from the high table. In the days that follow, you watch as the last scraps from the banquet are eked out. Bones simmered again, gravy thinned with water, and even the trencher bread crumbled into soup. There is pride in this too, a sense of triumph in making something from almost nothing, in carrying the memory of the feast into the hunger of ordinary days. Yet even in these small triumphs, danger lingers. The farther leftovers travel, the greater the risk that they spoil. Bread grows mold, cheese sweats and hardens, meat turns slick and gray. You learn to trust your nose and your tongue to eat, quickly or not at all. In this world, even abundance can become a threat, and the memory of last night's feast can fade all too quickly into today's stillness. Historians still argue whether the banquets of old were truly glorious or simply illusions, sustained by careful management and clever cooks. Some say that even the most splendid tables were haunted by the same risks that stalk every kitchen: mold, spoilage, and the lurking threat of disease. Others insist that for a moment at least, the Lord's table was a world apart, untouched by the hardships outside. You know, as you walk home with your hard-won scraps, that both are true. Asterisk, for a brief golden evening, the village and the manor are united in the promise of food, the hope of comfort, and the fleeting illusion that hunger has been banished. But as the sun rises, the old world returns, fields to be tilled, pots to be scrubbed, and the endless search for the next meal. You lie down that night with a full belly, listening to the quiet sounds of the house settling around you. The feast has passed, but the lesson remains. In the Middle Ages, every meal is a miracle, every scrap of victory, and every full belly a reminder that safety and danger, hunger and plenty, are never more than a day apart. The memory of last night's feast clings to you like honey, sweet, a little sticky, but already fading as hunger pry open your eyes with the dawn. This morning is colder, grayer. You shuffle to the kitchen, hands numb, stomach hopeful for nothing more than bread and a mug of ale. It is a familiar ritual, as much a part of life here as the toll of the church bell or the crow of the rooster. In this world, Red and ale are the daily bread, the twin pillars of survival for peasant and noble alike. You settle at the long, rough table, watching as the kitchen stirs to life. The bread weights stacked in baskets, rounds of rye, oblong, loaves of wheat, if the harvest has been good, dense wheels of barley bread, with a crust so tough you need a knife to carve a slice. Some mornings you smell the warmth of yeast and flour, the promise of something almost sweet. Other days you wrinkle your nose at a loaf gone slightly sour, or the green blush-off mold just starting to creep across the surface. The bread is rarely what you'd call soft. More often it's chewy, dense, heavy with seeds and flecks of husk. You pick out a bit of grit, a tiny pebble, or a splinter of straw, before tearing off a hunk and dipping it into a mug of weak, frothy ale. The ale is cool, cloudy, never quite the same from one batch to the next. Some days it's barely more than fermented water, a ghost of flavor, and a hint of alcohol. On better mornings, it's robust and malty, warming you from the inside out. You watch the others at the table, children gnawing on crusts, mothers breaking off the softest pieces for the youngest, old men dunking their bread to soften it for toothless gums. In these moments, you feel the long thread of tradition tying you to everyone who's ever lived in a village like this, stretching back through the centuries. Bread and ale are not luxuries here. They are the fabric of life, the answer to every meal. But as you eat, you remember the whispers that pass through. The village at certain times of year, when the harvest has been strange or the weather colder than usual. Some years the bread tastes wrong, bitter, metallic, with a sharpness that makes your tongue curl. The children complain of stomach aches. The old people grow pale and listless. Strange dreams haunt the nights. And in the mornings, you hear tales of visions, twitching limbs, or laughter that turns to screaming. You learn, as all villagers do, to fear the word ergot. It is a curse whispered in kitchens and at the mill, a sickness that can fell whole families or drive the village mad. You see it sometimes when you walk the fields in late summer. The rheads swollen and blackened, twisted into ugly claws, flecked with a purple dust. The millers know to watch for it, to pick it out from the grain, but sometimes hunger or haste means it ends up in the flour. Anyway, you've heard the old women say ergot is the devil's seed, a poison sent to punish or test. Historians still argue whether medieval people truly understood what caused it, or if they simply blamed bad bread for any evil that swept the village. You know only that when the symptoms come, they are unmistakable. Hands and feet that burn or freeze without. Warning. Skin that blackens and sloughs away. Visions of fire and demons, and a pain that can't be soothed by any prayer or pus. The bread is always at the center of the story. Some years a single loaf can bring down a household. You remember the tale of a family across the valley, a mother, a father, and 2 daughters stricken after eating bread from the last sack of rye stored too long in the damp. The oldest girl began to twitch, her hands curling into claws. The youngest screamed about snakes in the walls. By week's end, the mother had lost the feeling in her feet, and the father, once strong, could barely walk. The priest was called, then the healer, then the wise woman, with her sack of herbs and her mumbled prayers. Nothing helped. In the end, only time and luck saved the children. The parents never fully recovered. Even in years without visiblessedness, ergot lurks in the memory of every meal. You cut into a loaf and scan the crumb for specks of purple or black. You sniff for the telltale scent, a sweetness almost like honey, but with a metallic undertone that makes you uneasy. Some cooks try to mask the flavor with extra salt, honey, or even a splash of vinegar. Others simply slice away the worst and hope for the best. The ale, too, is not without risk. Brewed from whatever grain is available, barley, wheat, rye, or blend of all 3, it can carry the same hidden dangers as the bread. Sometimes a bad batch bubbles and fizzes strangely, the yeast fighting with whatever poison might be lurking in the grain. More than once you've heard of whole taverns brought low by a single barrel, the drinkers staggering out into the night, only to collapse by morning with fever and fits. You notice, too, how bread and nail mark the rhythm of the day. Work stops. For a hasty meal of bread and cheese, the crust softened with ale, the hunger soothed just enough to keep you going. In the fields, laborers carry rounds of bread wrapped in cloth, tearing off pieces between tasks. In the city, apprentices line up for their share of the bakery's stale loaves, the cheapest food in a world where everything comes dear. In the monastery, monks share their daily bread in silent meals, the taste reminding them of sacrifice and humility. Not every meal is so humble. On feast days, the bread is made from finer flour, sifted and kneaded with care, baked in the largest oven, and served hot. The ale is stronger, brewed for weeks instead of days, and poured into heavy mugs with a flourish. Even so, the threat of ergot is never far from anyone's mind. You see the miller cross himself as he empties the sacks, the baker mutter a prayer as she slides the dough into the oven. You wonder sometimes how many dreams, visions, and miracles were really born from bread gone wrong. There are stories of saints who saw angels after eating only rye for weeks, of dancers who spun through the night, laughing and weeping, unable to stop until their bodies gave out. Some say the famous dancing plagues that swept through towns were nothing more than the work of ergot, turning the bread of life into the bread of madness. You find comfort in routine each day, the same tasks. Gather grain, mill it to flour, knead and bake, brew and pour. The dangers feel smaller when you keep busy, and most of the time you eat without instant. But when the summer is too wet, when the storage room feels damp, or when the bread tastes just a little too sharp, you feel a flicker of fear. Still, bread and ale are the gifts off the earth, the promise that life will go on. You watch a mother feed her child the softest part of a loaf, her hands gentle, her eyes weary. You see friends raise their mugs in toast, laughter echoing through the dusk. For every story of sickness, there are 100 of survival, of people who ate, drank, and lived to see another season. Historians still debate whether ergot was the root of every madness, every mystery, every unexplained sickness in the Middle Ages. You know, as do all who've lived through a hungry year, that the truth is always muddled that every loaf carries, both risk and hope. And yet, each day you wake and break bread again, drink your ale, and trust that fortune will be kinder tomorrow. At the end of another long day, you sit by the dying fire, a hunk of bread in your lap and the dregs of ale warming your hands. You listen to the sounds of the village, the laughter from the tavern, the distant call of a nightbird, the hush of the wind in the eaves. You eat slowly, savoring the taste, feeling the familiar comfort and the old quiet worry that never quite leaves. In this world, every meal is a balance between faith and fear, hunger and hope. Bread and ale are your shield, your comfort, and sometimes, just sometimes, the reason you live to see another dawn. The memory of the morning's bread lingers, a little too sour, a little too dense. But for now, you're full enough to turn your mind to something more exciting. Today you wander beyond the hearth, away from the rhythms of the manna kitchen or the homey clutter of the village. Today, you lose yourself in the heart of the medieval town where food is everywhere, shouted, hawked, sniffed, sampled, and sometimes stomped. You step out into the market square, cobbles worn smooth by generations of hurrying feet. It's a riot of sound and color, sellers calling from their stalls, children darting between barrels, dogs barking as they chase scraps. The air itself is thick with the competing aromas of roasting meat, spiced wine, old fish, yeast, manure, and somewhere beneath it all, the inescapable sweetness of decay. If you want a meal and you want it fast, you come here. Street food is the answer for the busy craftsman, the visiting trader, the laborer with only a few coins to spare, or the beggar hoping for luck. Yet, as you quickly learn, every bite is a wager, and the odds are never quite in your favor. You join the crowd at a pie stall, the vendor's face broad and red from hours by the oven. His wares are stacked high, small hand pies oozing gravy. From broken crusts, their golden tops dusted with a hint of parsley or pepper, if he can afford it. You hand over a coin and take a bite. The pastry flakes, then gives way to a filling you can't quite identify. Is it beef, pork, pigeon, or the dreaded God knows what that rumor credits to every market pie? You chew and swallow, deciding that. For now hunger is a more pressing concern than curiosity. The vendor boasts loudly that his pies are fresh and the meat inside no older than the morning. But you know well how long a joint can sit before it's choppadand, minced and spiced until even a careful nose can't tell its age. Sometimes the meat inside has been refreshed with vinegar or brine, or heavily seasoned with whatever herbs are cheapest, hiding any hint of rot. Historians still argue whether medieval cooks actually believed this masked danger, or if they simply relied on luck and strong stomachs. You move on, drawn by the hiss and crackle of something frying over an open flame. The fishmongers' carts are surrounded by men and boys, each clutching a greasy scrape of parchment filled with battered fish or eels, the oil seeping through to their hands. The smell is heady, rich, salty, almost overwhelming. You take a piece and find the crust crisp and golden, the flesh inside soft but faintly muddy. Sometimes the batter hides a world of disappointment, bones, scales, or a taste that says the fish was fresh 3 days ago. Yet in the press of bodies and the swirl of noise, no one complains. You eat quickly, wipe your hands on your tunic, and press deeper into the crowd. The bakers have set up shop along the square, their ovens still warm from the night's work. They sell rolls, pretzels, thick slabs of rye, and sweet buns filled with honey or cheese when the day is lucky. Children hover around, noses pressed to the counters, eyes wide as the baker slices the softest pieces for those who can pay. The loaves are sometimes hard, sometimes so fresh the steam curls in the morning air. But even here there's risk. You hear stories of flour mixed with chalk or sawdust, of old bread freshened with a quick soak in the nearest puddle, and a few minutes over the coals. The water sellers shout for attention, promising clear, cold river. Water as they pour their wares from battered buckets into wooden cups. You pause, remembering the warnings whispered by the well. Never trust the river after rain. Never drink what you can't see. Still, thirst is powerful, and sometimes you drink anyway, hoping the river was kind that morning. You turn down a side street where the smell of onions and garlic hangs heavy in the air. Here, a woman stirs a huge cauldron of soup, ladling it out to those who pay with a few coppers or a barter. The soup is thin, filled with beans and greens, maybe a shred of meat if the butcher was generous. You sip and find it warming, if bland, with the unmistakable undercurrent of something fermented. Was the cabbage a bit old? Was the broth stretched too far with water? You taste, you wonder, you keep eating. Street food isn't just a meal. It's a spectacle. Roasted chestnuts pope in pans over the fire, their scent sharp and sweet. Skewers of meat, sometimes mutton, sometimes goat, sometimes something else entirely, sizzle over coals, sending up sparks and smoke. There are sweets, too. Candied almonds for the lucky, boiled sugar twisted into ribbons and sold to children with sticky fingers. You try a bite, wincing as the sugar cracks between your teeth. The sweetness almost medicinal after so much salt and smoke. Not every food is safe, and not every vendor is honest. There are rumors of rats and cats passing as rabbit, of sausages made from offal and swept with spices until no one cares what's inside. The laws try to keep up. Market inspectors prowl the square, sniffing and sampling, checking weights and freshness. Bakers caught selling bread too light or pies too old are punished with public shame, forced to wear their rotten wares on chains around their necks, or even tossed into the stocks for a day. You pass a stall selling wine, the vendor calling, "Good for the blood, good for the heart." You take a sip and feel the sharp burn of vinegar beneath the sweetness. A cask gone off, but still served, still drunk. The people laugh, toast each other, and move on, none the wiser, all the hungrier. Children beg at every corner, hoping for a crust or a handful of nuts. Dogs slink under the stalls, quick to snatch whatever hits the ground. The city poor hover at the edge, waiting for the last hour when prices drop and sellers are desperate to be rid of what remains before night falls and rot sets in for good. You've seen fights break out over the dregs of a stew or the last unsold pie. You've also seen strangers share what little they have, laughter and hunger blurring into something like hope. As night deepens, the smells change. Smoke and roasting meat give way to the sweet, sticky tang of spilled wine, the sour stench of fish bones left in the gutter, the pungent memory of a dozen meals clinging to the cobbles. You realize that the market is as much a living thing as the people who fill it, always moving, always hungry, always risky. You drift past the taverns, their doors thrown wide, the clamor of voices spilling into the street. Inside, travelers drink and eat and sing, the food coming fast and hot, but never truly safe. A stew bubbles in a great pot by the fire, thick with barley and whatever meat the cook could find. The scent is glorious, but you wonder what's at the bottom of the pot. An old bone, a turnip gone soft, a scrap of offal too small to notice. Historians still argue whether medieval street food was truly more dangerous than what was cooked at home, or if the risks were simply more visible in the press of the crowd. Some point to the endless outbreaks of illness that followed market days, while others note that for many, the market was the only place to eat at all. You suspect the truth is, as always, somewhere in the muddle, a little more danger, a lot more excitement, and just enough luck to keep most people coming back. You buy one last treat, a thick slice of cheese, sharp and salty, cut from a wheel that's seen better days. You nibble and walk, the flavors mingling with the memory of roast meat, spiced wine, and fresh bread. By now the market is emptying, the last calls fading into the dusk, the torches burning low. You turn toward home, passing piles of discarded food, scraps picked over by stray dogs, and the poorest of the poor. You see children gathering apple cores and half-eaten rolls, laughing as they run off into the dark. The market leaves nothing behind. Every bite, every scrap, every risk is swallowed up by hunger. You reach your door, hands sticky, stomach full, but uneasy. The memory of the market lingers. The taste of pie, the salt of sweat, the laughter of strangers. You know that tomorrow you'll return ready to risk it all for another meal. Because in this world, food is not just nourishment. It's a wager, a dance with danger, and a reminder that you're alive. You fall asleep with the sounds of the street echoing in your mind, dreaming of pies and puddles, sweet buns and bitter ale, the endless hungry swirl of the medieval market, loud, wild, and always just a little bit rotten. The chill of early winter slips beneath the doorframe as you light the first morning fire, your breath rising in little clouds before the hearth begins to warm. The world outside is hardening, mud freezing at the edge of the well, trees dark and bare, the earth closing up for sleep. The garden is gone, the fields are silent. There will be no fresh food until the spring. No wild greens, no eggs from the hens who've stopped laying. No milk until the cows calf again. Asterisk, this is the moment preserved food is meant for. The salted, the smoked, the dried, the pickled, the carefully buried, and the quietly fermenting. These are the foods that kept villagers alive in winter, or didn't. You either pantry shelves and the cool corners of the cellar with both hope and dread, knowing that every meal now is a test of whether what you saved is still safe, or just pretending to be. You begin, as most do, with salt. Salt is life. It's adrift from the sea or the ancient inland beds, mined in white sparkling blocks, traded over hundreds of miles. Wars are fought over salt. Taxes rise and fall with it. Your family keeps their salt in a wooden box near the fire, carefully sealed. In summer, you packed meat into wooden barrels and poured thick brine over it, sealing it with lard and prayer. Now, in the dead of winter, you lift the lid with cautious reverence. A smell hits you first, sharp, rich, a little sour. You peel back the layer of hardened fat and find the meat pale and tough, stir with salt crystals. You slice a piece free and fry it over the fire, watching it hiss and curl. The taste is intense, chewy, nearly impossible to swallow without a mug of ale. Still, it fills you. Still, it keeps you alive. Not all salting goes as planned. You remember the batch last year and salted pork that looked fine until the first bite. It had a sweetness, almost like fruit, then a sourness that curled your tongue. Within hours, the house was sick. The healer blamed bad barrel. The priest whispered of spoiled salt. The pigs, you think, were already halfway gone before the salt touched them. Smoking is your next defense. Out back in the little smokehouse, slabs of meat hang blackened and dry. They sway gently in the cold air, soaked in a memory of fire. You slice a piece thin, chew it slowly. It is harsh, earthy, but somehow satisfying. The flavor of wood smoke clings to your clothes, your hair, your breath. It's not subtle, not elegant, but it keeps rot at bay. And in winter, that's enough. You've seen everything smoked. Hams, fish, even cheese. Sometimes it works. Sometimes too much damp gets into the smokehouse and the mold creeps in under the crust. You peel away the outer layer and hope the inside still holds. Then there are the dried foods. Apples strung up in the rafters, curled and leathery. Mushrooms lined across shelves, dark and cracked. Beans so hard it could break a tooth if not soaked overnight. You admire the cleverness of it. How water is taken away to stop the rot. How food is preserved not by flavor, but by denial. You boil dried apples with honey and a little ale to make a sort of mash. You mash beans into pastes, stir mushrooms into soups. You don't eat to enjoy. You eat to last. You've learned that taste is a luxury, but texture is a battle. Every bite must be softened, coaxed into submission with hours of boiling, soaking, baking. It takes more fuel to cook than it does to preserve. Some days you wonder which is the real cost. Pickling is another gamble. You open a clay jar of onions, the brine cloudy and sharp. They crunch, they sting, they fight back with vinegar. You serve them beside barley porridge or salty stew. Not everyone likes them, but they break the monotony. You've tasted pickled walnuts, turnips, even fish. The fish was a mistake. Soft, silvery slivers floating in an oily brine. You spent 2 days recovering from that brave experiment, fermentation. Now that's an art and a riddle. You've had cabbage turned into a tangy relish that woke the whole. Table up, and you've had cabbage that bubbled wrong, turned gray, and let out a smell so foul it sent the dog running. You can never be sure until you taste, and even then you might not know for hours. The cellar holds your most trusted foods and your most cursed. There's the wheel of cheese from the summer market, now crusted in ash and wax. You cut it open. and hope. Sometimes it's a dream, soft, fragrant, layered with nut and fire. Other times it's alive with something else. Threads of blue-green mold, an acrid sting, a texture that resists every knife. You scrape the bad away. You pretend the rest is fine. You eat it anyway. You try your luck with eggs stored in lime water sealed in jars. They wobble strangely when cracked. You sniff and decide, today, maybe not. You pass over them and reach for grains instead. Grain is your lifeline. Oats, barley, rye, all ground and stored in bags, but grain too betrays. Weevils hatch in the warm months and hibernate in the cold. You've opened a bag to find it moving, alive with tiny invaders. You shake it out, sift it, pray the damage isn't too deep. Some say a little extra protein doesn't hurt. You'd rather not test it. You grind what's left into porridge, into paste, into something that sticks to the spoon and fills the belly. You stir it with dried herbs, leftover fat, a bit of pickled juice, whatever you have. Some days it's almost comforting. Other days, it's just beige survival. Historians still debate how reliable medieval preservation methods really were. Some claim that people overestimated their success, mistaking lucky batches for skill. Others argue that generations of quiet trial and error turned even the simplest peasants into preservation experts. You suspect both are true. You've seen barrels of fish rot despite every precaution, and you've eaten smoked meat that was still edible after 2 winters, hardened into something close to wood than food. You remember one winter a neighbor unsealing a jar of quint preserves, made with honey and boiled down to a golden sludge. The taste was like sunshine, sweet, floral, right against the endless salt and ash of winter. Everyone at the table smiled. No one said it, but you all knew that one bite could keep your hope alive for another week. Preserved food has a strange dignity. It's food that has fought to survive just like you. It may taste tired. It may look wrong, but it means you've planned, prepared, endured. It means your hands worked in the summer for your mouth in the snow. That makes it sacred, but it's not always safe. You've seen people fall ill from smoked meat left too long, from eggs that turned, from grain that carried unseen rot. You've watched a child sicken slowly after a feast made from preserved boar. No one could be sure what caused it. The steward smoked tongue, salted fat, dried mushrooms, and a pickle of something sour. It could have been anything. Everything. You learn to listen to the food, the sound a jar makes when opened, the smell of the brine, the color of the fat. You tap loaves to hear if they ring hollow. You press cheese with your thumb. You watch bread for strange blotches, the ale for odd bubbles. Every sense becomes a tool, a shield against the unseen. Not everything is eaten. Some preserves are kept for trade, for offering for bribes. You've known a farmer to trade a wheel of aged cheese for a whole goat. A woman once bartered a jar of pickled pears for the midwife's silence. Preserved food is value, power. In a world where nothing stays fresh, anything that endures becomes precious. There's pride in pulling out a jar of plum jam, its wax seal unbroken from the back of the shelf. In cutting into salted pork that hasn't gone gray, in finding that last dried apple slice, soft and sweet after a long winter. These small victories make the long months bearable. You eat the best first. That's the rule. In November, you open the good jars. In December, the middle ones. By February, you're scraping jars, chewing dried beans like candy, trying to remember what fruit tasted like. March is for guessing. April is for prayer. By then, the preserved food is tired. You reddered. Everything smells faintly of vinegar, smoke, salt, or desperation. But spring is near. You tell yourself it's near. You boil the last barrel of pickled cabbage and mix it with old grain and call it soup. You chew dried meat like leather and thank the gods it still has flavor. And when the first green shoots appear, just a handful of sorrel or wild garlic, you nearly cry. You eat them raw, dirt and all, because the preserved world is ending, and a fresh world is coming back. Still, you'll do it all again. Next summer, you'll salt the pork, smoke the fish, hang the herbs, dry the fruit, bottle the pickles. You'll line your shelves with jars like soldiers guarding you through winter. 'Cause you know now, preservation is not about taste. It's about memory. It's about defiance. It's about saying, I will make it. I will survive. And as you sip the last of the pickled onion brine, you raise your cup to that strange, sour, faithful promise. You stare into the pot simmering over the fire, steam curling upward like a ghost. It's another stew. Of course it is. Thick with barley and a scrap of smoked meat from the salt barrel. Turned soft in the boil. It smells fine. Good even. But something nags at you. Not the food itself, but the pot. The heavy iron cauldron it's cooking in. Blackened and nicked from years of flame and scraping. You've scrubbed that pot 100 times. But lately, the bottom feels strange, rougher, grainy. And the stew sometimes tastes like something more than just meat and grain. Something sour, something bitter. You can't quite name it, and neither can anyone else. But you've heard stories. Everyone has. Because in the Middle Ages, the real poison wasn't always in the food. Sometimes it was in the thing that held it. Your home kitchen doesn't have many luxuries. One good pot, maybe two. A spit for roasting. If you're lucky. A pan of hammered iron or a clay vessel for porridge. You make do as most do with what you have. But every meal cooked in the same pot day after day takes on something of that vessel. Its flavor, its age, its flaws. Iron is dependable dot. It's what most commoners use. Tough solid gets the job done. But iron rusts, it chips. It weeps into food. In invisible streaks. You've tasted it, a sharp metallic tang, especially when the stew's been left on too long or a bit of vinegar has been added. Some say it builds strength, that a bit of iron in the blood is good for you. Others whisper that too much churns the stomach, blackens the tongue. Clay pots are safer in some ways, lighter, easier to replace, made from the earth, but they crack. Easily. One drop and it's gone. They absorb everything. The grease of yesterday's bacon, the spices from last week's feast, the mold that grows in damp corners. You've scraped a layer of fur from the inside of a clay pot before. You've seen milk sour inside it without warning. And then there's put. It gleams in candlelight, soft and cool to the touch. A noble's table is covered in it. Plates, goblets, platters, elegant in shape and impressively heavy. You've eaten from pewter once during a feast at the manor and felt strangely honored. But now, older, wiser, you think back to the rumors. Lead, that's the word that comes up. Not often and never loudly. But it's there, hidden beneath the elegance. Pewter isn't pure. It's an alloy. A mix of tin, and if you're unlucky, lead a bit to make it heavier, softer, easier to shape. And if the potware is old, cheap, or made in haste, there's more lead than tin. You remember the way the wine tasted from the pewter goblet. Smooth? Yes. But oddly sweet, strangely slick. You thought nothing of it at the time. Asterisk, but that kind-of sweetness, the old women say, means poison. Not the dramatic kind. No collapsing, no convulsions, just a creeping tiredness. Aching joints, clouded thoughts, gums that bleed, hands that shake, slow poisoning, silent unseen. Historians still argue how many illnesses in the Middle Ages came not from spoiled meat or infected water, but from the tools used to eat and drink. Some suggest whole families were sickened by their tableware. Others point out that the rich, Those who used pewter and bronze and glazed pottery often suffered more than the poor, who stuck to wood and iron. Wooden bowls, rough-hewn and splintering, don't leach poison. They mold, they rot, they crack, but they don't kill. You've eaten many a meal from a wooden trencher softened with broth or stained with wine. It may not be elegant, but it's safe. Safer than pewter. Safer than painted ceramics, with glazes that flake and chip and drift unnoticed into soup and stew. In some homes, brass pots gleam on high shelves, used only on holy days. Beautiful, but dangerous. Brass carries zinc and copper, fine in small doses, harmful in excess. You've heard of a woman who made jam in a brass pan. By morning, her whole family had stomach cramps, and her youngest was never quite right again. It was blamed on the fruit. But the old herbalist muttered about the metal, how certain things draw poison from the pan into the food. Even the knives used to slice bread or cut meat can betray you. Iron blades rust, bronze ones pit. Only the best have steel, and even then they dull quickly, flake under use. You once cut into a roast with a borrowed knife and found a sliver of the blade stuck in the meat. You chewed it unknowingly. Your gums bled for days. Your lips touch a ceramic cup, its rim rough with age. You drink cautiously, watching the glaze flake into your cider. You wonder how many people have drunk from the same cup, how many lips it's touched, how many meals it's passed through. Clay is cheap, but glazes are fickle. Some are made with ash and minerals, others with lead again. The kitchen fire glows behind you, and you watch your daughter stir the pot with a wooden spoon. You're grateful it's wood, not metal. You remember a merchant who sold spoons made of bone, polished and white, beautiful things carved from animal remains. But bone, too, has its flaws. It's porous, it soaks up flavor, it breaks. And sometimes, if not cleaned well, it carries disease. You listen to her stir, and you wonder what's in the stew. Not just the barley and the beans, but what the pot has added. What years of use have layered into it. What invisible ghosts rise with the steam. Sometimes people grow sick, and there's no clear cause. They blame bad meat, bad air, curses, stars. But you wonder, maybe it's the goblet, maybe the ladle, maybe the very plate that holds the meal. You start to see the kitchen, not just as a place of warmth and survival, but as a battlefield, not with swords and shields, but with pans and pitches. You've seen wealthy homes where the sickness seems to follow the meal, children who grow sluggish, women who lose their hair, men who forget their words, all eating from the same beautiful dishes, drinking from the same shining cups. You visit the healer asking for something to ease the pain in your joints. She gives you a tea of willow bark and warns you gently, eat simply wood and clay. Stay away from silver unless it's pure. And never drink wine that tastes like sugar, unless you made it yourself. In your village, some people begin to return to wooden bowls, not out of nostalgia, but fear. The old carpenter carves them from beechwood and sells them for a few coins. He jokes that they're less likely to kill you than a lord's feast. Everyone laughs, but no one disagrees. You inspect your pot again. The iron is rough, yes, but familiar. It's not elegant, but it's safe. As safe as anything in this world can be. You clean it with ash and salt. You dry it by the fire. You hope. Historians still discuss whether medieval people truly understood the dangers of their cookware. Some argue they were ignorant of lead and glaze. Others say the wisdom was always there, passed quietly, mother to daughter, in whispers and rituals. Don't eat from that. Don't boil milk in this. Never cook vinegar in copper. Warnings encoded. In memory, not in books. You've seen that wisdom. You carry it now. And still each meal you prepare carries a question. What will this pot give us? Nourishment? Sickness? Both. You finish the stew and ladle it into wooden bowls. You pass them to your children, your partner, yourself. You eat slowly, listening for that metallic echo that sometimes haunts the back of your throat. Tonight, it's not there. You breathe easier. Tomorrow, who knows? But for now, the pot is warm, the stew is rich, and your family is safe. For one more meal in a world that makes no promises, there's something off about the honey. It's sweet. Yes, thick and golden and slow to move in the clay jar. But when you spoon a bit into your morning porridge, there's a faint metallic edge. You taste it twice, maybe 3 times, and try to convince yourself it's the oats or the pot or the spoon. But it's not. Something's wrong. You glance around the room, half expecting to see someone watching, but there's only your sister scrubbing. The hearth humming softly. Still your stomach knots, because you've heard the stories. Everyone has. Poison in the honey, powder in the wine, oil that clings a little too long to the tongue, a slice of cheese that turns the blood cold. In the Middle Ages, food wasn't just a way to stay alive. It could be a weapon, silent and sophisticated. And nothing, absolutely nothing, terrified people more. The closer you are to power, the more dangerous your meals become. You've seen it. In noble houses, food tasters who sample every dish before the Lord dares lift a fork. You've watched servants whisper over goblets, seen hands tremble as a roast is sliced. Among the wealthy, the powerful, the ambitious, every bite is an act of trust and sometimes a fatal mistake. But poison isn't just for kings. In your village, there was once a girl who fell ill after a wedding feast. No one else had touched her. Food. By morning, she was vomiting blood, shaking so violently she cracked her own teeth. She didn't live to see another sunset. Her family buried her with haste. People said it was a sickness. But the whispers said otherwise. A jealous cousin, a feud over inheritance, a stolen lover. No one knew for sure. But after that, no one ever ate alone with kin they didn't trust. Historians still argue how often food was actually used as a tool of murder in the Middle Ages. Some suggest it was rare, more fantasy than fact. Others insist it was common, hidden beneath layers of secrecy, especially in monastic or noble environments, where knowledge of herbs and distillation made poisons easier to craft and victims easier to silence. You've seen your grandmother pick, through herbs with meticulous care, not just to flavor the stew, but to avoid suspicion. A sprig too many. A leaf that looks like mint, but burns the throat. A root that heals one man and kills another. In this world, the line between healing and harm is paper thin. You remember the first time you saw belladonna? A beautiful plant with lush, dark berries that glistened like jewels. A traveling herbalist showed it to you. Just 1 berry, and you'll feel your heart dance, she said. 3, and it won't beat again. She smiled when she said it. You never forgot. The danger of poisoning goes far beyond what's natural. Some people, they say, are gifted or cursed with a knowledge of maleficium or harmful magic. Food becomes the vehicle for spells. Bread whispered over at midnight. Salt cursed and hidden beneath the table. Soup stirred with incantations of revenge. In times of plague, famine, or inexplicable death, these suspicions explode. A village. Nearby once burned a woman who made a chicken stew that killed half her family. She insisted it was spoiled meat. The priest insisted it was the devil. Her screams lasted 3 hours afterward. No one ate chicken for months. And what about love spells? Not every food curse is meant to harm. Some are brewed with longing. Mead steeped with herbs to bind affection. Cakes baked on St. Anna's Eve to reveal the dream of your future husband. The line between enchantment and manipulation grows blurry. A woman once confessed to putting poppy juice in her husband's wine to make him gentler. It worked until he never woke up again. You've grown used to watching people's hands in the kitchen. Who adds the salt? Who stirs the pot? Who serves the first portion? In a good household, everyone eats from the same dish. It's a sign of trust. But when someone declines the meal they made, when a host insists you eat first, that's when eyes narrow and fingers hover near the bread knife a moment too long. You remember a neighbor, old and hunched, who never ate anything she didn't cook herself. She carried her own flask of ale, her own bit of bread. People called her paranoid, but she lived into her 90s while their daughter's husband died coughing black. No one laughed after that. Taverns are another den of suspicion. Strangers sharing benches, drinks poured out of sight, food cooked at hands you'll never see. There's safety in noise, but also danger. You've heard of innkeepers who quiet troublesome, guests with a bitter tincture in the ale, of servers paid to slip something extra into the soup of a merchant with too much silver and too few friends. Even traveling clergy aren't above suspicion. You've seen holy men bless their food twice, cross themselves after every bite. A bishop once dropped dead at a feast in the abbey. The monk said he choked. The gossip said otherwise. The cook was never seen again. Some poisons come slowly. You know about arsenic, pale powder, tasteless. It mimics illness, fever, vomiting, wasting. It kills in days or months. The wealthy fear it. The poor fear it more because they cannot afford the healer who might spot it in time. A noble woman was once found with powder hidden in a ring. She claimed it was a love charm. The court didn't believe her, and there's Flyer Garrick. Mushrooms. Bright red with white spots, beautiful and deadly. The child once picked them thinking they'd make soup pretty. Her mother slapped them from her hand, screaming. That family didn't eat mushrooms for a decade after. You learn, as everyone does, that food is never just food. It's trust. It's power. It's risk. Even the most innocent things have shadows. Honey hides aconite. Cheese hides rotted herbs. Wine hides bitter almonds. Another sign, they say, of poisoned cups. You train your tongue to taste more than flavor. You taste safety or warning. Weddings are the worst. Too much food, too many people, too many rivalries. A single bad pie can ruin more than the evening. A single foul-tasting egg can end a bloodline. So you watch the mother of the bride lean close to the kitchen maid. You watch the groom's uncle refuse his me. You watch the bride smile, but not swallow. You begin to eat more simply. Bread and cheese, porridge, a boiled egg. You make your own meals, avoid taverns, taste everything twice. Historians still puzzle over how many deaths blamed on witches. Curses or sickness might have actually been meals gone wrong, or meals made wrong. A pinch too much of the wrong herb, a drop too much of the wrong oil. You wonder how many confessions came from guilty hearts, and how many from frightened ones. You know, because the thing about food curses is they leave almost no trace. There are stories of cursed salt sold in cloth bags, of haunted water drawn from wells where murder had once been done, of ghost meat, animals slaughtered under moonlight, whose flesh carried the sorrow of their death. If you eat it, they say, you'll dream of teeth and hooves and silence. You've never tasted it. You hope you never will. The longer you live, the more careful you become. You don't accept food from strangers. You don't eat offerings left on thresholds. You don't taste the stew if the cook is weeping. You don't trust sweets wrapped in ribbons from a woman whose eyes are too bright. You cook your own meals. You bless your own salt. You feed your dog first if you're not sure. You wait 5 minutes to see if he licks his lips or starts to whine. And when the food tastes strange, like this morning's honey, you throw it into the fire. You didn't say a word. You just watch it burn. Because in the end, What protects you isn't knowledge, it's instinct, it's fear, it's wisdom passed down in whispers. Never eat what doesn't smell right. Never drink what you didn't pour. And never trust a meal when the cook won't eat it too. In a world where the line between hunger and horror is thinner than the crust on a stale pie, those rules might just keep you alive. You sit back from the table, wiping your mouth with a sleeve, and feel it. Not satisfaction exactly, but something near it. Warmth, fullness, a kind of fragile peace. But it doesn't last, because tonight the pot is empty, the bread bin is bare, the pickle jar is drained. You've eaten the last of what's left, and you're still hungry. This isn't new. You've known hunger before. Everyone in your world has. In the Middle Ages, food isn't just a need. It's a hope, a struggle, a prayer. You work for it. You wait for it. And sometimes, even when you do everything right, it never quite shows up. You remember winters when the snow came too early and the stores ran out. Springs when the planting failed. Summers when rain fell wrong or not at all. Autumns when the harvest wasn't enough to matter. You remember families turning their bread thinner, their soups more water than meal. You remember the sound of your own belly groaning against your ribs. The worst part of hunger isn't the pain. It's the decisions it forces. Do you eat the last seed or plant it and starve another day? Do you give your child the only egg or split it in two? Do you keep the cow or slaughter it early because milk won't feed 6 mouths? Hunger is not a drama in this world. It's background noise, a low ache, a familiar shadow. You've learned how to stretch. A bit of barley and a few weeds can make a broth. Red crust can be softened with water and a pinch of salt. You once made cheese from curdled milk and herbs. Your family called it wool paste, but they ate it anyway. You've learned how to pretend. You serve meals in big bowls so they look fuller. You use spices to trick the tongue into thinking it's richer than it is. You smile through bites that taste like defeat, and you've learned how to wait. You chew slowly. You set the table with care. You let the hunger settle like dust. Even the wealthy aren't immune. You've seen noble tables stacked with food, but only for display. One roast sliced thin must feed 40. A tower of bread is hollow inside. The wine is watered down. The cheese is weeks past good, and no one speaks of it because appearances must be kept even when the belly growls. Historians still argue how widespread hunger truly was. Some claim it was seasonal, predictable, survivable. Others argue it was constant, with famine always a whisper away. You don't need scholars to tell you what you felt in your bones. And then there are the ones who never knew hunger. The truly rich. The bishops, the lords, the royal kitchens with their swan pies and jellied fruits and rare imported grains. You've never seen those dishes. You've only heard of them. Meals of legend where food is art, not survival. But even in those halls, stories trickle out of meats gone bad beneath the gilding, of sources thickened with flour to cover rot, of servants punished for theft because they dared to taste, of nobles sickened by exotic dishes they couldn't pronounce, because even when the table groaned, the food was never truly safe. You've known that all along. You think back over everything you've eaten in life. The salt-cured mystery meat, the sour porridge, the smoked eel with bones like needles. You remember the pies that crumbled strangely, the apples with soft spots, the wine that fizzed when it shouldn't. You've survived all of it. You think of those who didn't make it. A boy who drank from the wrong stream. A woman who used moldy grain. A priest with poisoned wine. A girl who ate the wrong berries. The healer who never woke. Hunger stays with you, quiet, steady, like an old dog curled in your belly. It teaches you to be careful, to be grateful, to chew bones clean, to save peels for broth. to wait your turn always. You've seen bread stolen from children, a man beaten for hiding grain, women trading dignity for a meal, a baker's house burned for loaves too light, but you've seen kindness too, a crust slipped into a pocket, a bowl left at a doorstep, a mother pretending she's full, a neighbor sharing the last of her stew. Some call it punishment, some attest you just call it Tuesday. Still, food becomes a comfort. Not the food itself, but the ritual, the cooking, the sharing, the quiet. You remember your father humming over the pot, your mother tasting with her fingertip, your brother stealing the first bite, saying it pleased the gods. Laughter around hard bread, pride in a cabbage that didn't rot. Food, even when bad, keeps you tethered to yourself. You've seen a starving child eat slowly, just to make it last. So when the meal ends tonight, and the bowl is empty, you sit with the silence. You thank the fire, the grain, the pot for holding, your hands for not shaking. You are not full, but not empty. Your breath is steady. You remember the bread. You forget the fear. You sleep out, and tomorrow you begin again. You've walked these smoky streets, held sour cups, smelled meat gone wrong, trusted and regretted, but you've survived. Through famine and feast, you've known how food can hurt or heal. And even now, something gentle remains, the way a bowl is passed, a meal shared, a prayer murmured into soup. So tonight, as candles fade and limbs grow heavy, let go of salt, smoke, and fear. Let your breath follow the sound of simmering stew. Let sleep wrap you like warm bread. No poison, no hunger, just rest. You've made it through the meal. You've made it through the tomorrow will come. Sweet dreams.